Good morning, everybody. Good morning. How's everyone doing? It's good to see you here. It's good to have you here at 11:11 celebration and this beautiful morning outside. Got a couple of quick announcements to make, so take just a couple of minutes here before we get started. Turn over your bulletin on the back side. You'll see a few things. First of all, before we even do that, make sure you fill out these cards here. We have this last week or so, we sent out these wonderful little postcards. We do them every couple of months to everybody, whoever has attended here for over a period of 100 days. It's always interesting. That's kind of the pattern for some of our folks that come in here, is we attend once every 100 days, which is, we consider that a regular attendee, you know, so. But you want to make sure you at least attend once every 100 days, because that way you get one of these cards. And this last card was a lot of fun. There's a few still sitting out on the table that says, when life throws you an unexpected experience or turn, then you just kind of shout plot twist. And it's got, I think it's a lemur, a beautiful white lemur with really bug-eyed expression, yeah. But no, we're glad to be in this journey with you, even when the plot twists come our way. And I'll make a little announcement about a plot twist a little bit later on in the service as more of our folks gather in here. But make sure you fill this thing up, because it's wonderful for us to keep in touch with you, and as well also to know who was here. The other thing is, and you'll bring that up when we do our offering song here in a minute. The other thing is to notice on the back, Doxe Sultanov, our beautiful and amazing, what we call the Latvian bullet. She will, not just because of the way she plays the cello either, but she'll be performing on Tuesday, May 8th, and over here in the sanctuary, a beautiful concert. It's always a wonderful experience. I hope you can be a part of that. The sanctuary almost always fills out for that, and we can't wait to see that and experience that with you this coming week. So hopefully you can be a part of that. We will not have drumming, in case you were interested or wondering why it's not announced, because it's normally the second Tuesday of the month. We're not going to be doing that this week. All of our leaders are out of town. And speaking of our leaders being out of town, Sharm, our wonderful co-leader in here, works with me, is out with Austin, our church AV guy, and they are with Chuck Graff and several others, and they're in Costa Rica working with hurricane victims in Puerto Rico. Thank you. It was one of the Ricos. It was Rico or Rica. I couldn't remember if it was the guy or the girl. But yeah, they're in Puerto Rico, and they are there for the whole week doing repair work in some pretty remote areas without electricity and such. So we can't wait to hear about how that goes, how it went with them this week. But we want to keep them in our thoughts and celebrate the work that they're doing, the good work they're doing as representatives from our church. You'll notice on the sheet that was sitting in your chair also a number of the missions that we were involved in throughout the year. I did two things. I included this at the back, just sort of a listing of all the things we did in 2017 as a church in terms of our local mission here in the city and all the good work that this church does. So I hope you can pick up one of those and look at all of those statistics, but also then the kinds of missional activities that we do beyond the local church and beyond our city, which are here on this sheet. And every year we do a special offering. There are envelopes at the back on the table. So rather than put that in here in these baskets, we want you to take the sheet home and give some thought to it and some prayer to it, and think about what you might be donating, might be willing to donate to the missional activities that we do. These are all specific activities that our church does because of the support of the congregation. So consider that. Habitat for Humanity is full for the 12th. On Saturday, that group that I'm facilitating, the group that Sharm is facilitating on the 19th, still has some positions open. So if you haven't signed up for that, I hope you'll give that some consideration. You just go to the link on the bulletin here. It's going to be a great experience. There'll be 25 of us or 30 of us on the 12th, and right now there's about 19 or 20 or so for the 19th, so there's still some positions for that one. I think those are the main announcements for now. I've got something else to announce in a little bit, but let's begin with our welcome candle.
Maybe.
Oh. It should be on. There you go.
It is on?
Yes.
Okay. Our welcome candle is glowing, so please read with me. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again.
From the lips of some old singer, we can share the troubles we already know. Turn 'em on, turn 'em on, turn on those sad songs. When all hope is gone, why don't you tune in and turn them on? They reach into your room, oh, just feel the gentle touch. When all hope is gone, sad songs say so much. If someone else is suffering enough, oh, to write it down, when every single word makes sense, then it's easier to have those songs around. The kick inside is in the line that finally gets to you. And it feels so good to hurt so bad and suffer just enough to sing the blues. So turn 'em on, turn 'em on, turn on those sad songs. When all hope is gone, why don't you tune in and turn them on? They reach into your room, oh, just feel the gentle touch. When all hope is gone, sad songs say so much. Sad songs they say, sad songs they say, sad songs they say, sad songs they say so much. So turn 'em on, turn 'em on, turn on those sad songs. When all hope is gone, why don't you tune in and turn them on? They reach into your room, oh, just feel the gentle touch. When all hope is gone, sad songs say so much. When all hope is gone, sad songs say so much. When every little bit of hope is gone, sad songs say so much. When every little bit of hope is gone, sad songs say so much. When all hope is gone, sad songs say so much. When every little hope is gone, sad songs say so much.
On Thursday, as we prepare for our prayer, just a reminder that next Sunday is Mother's Day, and this congregation has been mindful of the fact that Mother's Day is a very hard day, and that although there's always those Christmas and Easter and Mother's Day crowds that come on Mother's Day, there's also a large segment that does not come on Mother's Day because it's a very difficult day for many whose children have died, for those whose mothers have died, for those who have always wanted to be mothers but who were unable to, and for those who for many, many different reasons, are not able to hold children within their arms. And so First United Methodist of Fort Worth is offering a service this Thursday at 7 o'clock in the chapel for mothers and families whose children have died, and for those children who are longed for. And so if you are one of those mothers, if you would like to join us, it will be myself and Mike Marshall and Linda, I believe, and Tom, maybe, hopefully, in the chapel. On Thursday at 7, we'll have a service of candlelight and music and reflection and community, and we would love for you to come. Do you have the cards? I think there's some cards in the back and cards at the Welcome Center. If you know people who you would like to invite, we would love to have you or others come and join us during that time. May we pray together. Oh God, it is through the sad songs that often we find great meaning, but there's also hope, that when the hope seems that it is gone, there is a candle, a light, a flame that burns deep within. And we find that sometimes when we are alone, but mostly when we look around in community and find that we are not by ourselves. So in whatever place we find ourselves in this moment, we find community in one another in this room, knowing that once this hour is over, we go forward from this place, but we do not go alone, for you walk with us. There is a love and a passion that burns within. And may it be that we let go of the image of what it is that life should be and live in the moment of what life truly is. We find these things in the way in which you come to us, and we pray these in the name of one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
Thank you, Deandra. Can I invite all you super handsome and gorgeous people to please stand and sing a song with us, please? We're going to do it. And if you brought an offering, this is a great time to bring it up to the table. We're going to go together right about now. We know this river always keeps flowing. We will be rowing our whole lives long. That's right. And we may never know where we're going. All right. But we can go there singing a song. Let's do it some more. Just like a mother to a child she's holding. Just like a soldier marching along. Just like the faithful on Sunday morning, raising our voices, singing a song. Sounds good. Eyes will shine but not as bright, arms will hold but not as tight, when the word is only spoken. Of the beauty right there beside you. Bring it inside you, making you strong, so that when trouble comes round to greet you, still it will lead you. All right. Singing a song. So take us till angels mistake us for a heavenly throne. And may that joyful sound be our shelter and find us together singing a song. Take it home. We'll be together singing a song. Yeah, that's a Peter Mayer song right there. That's some good stuff. Take a moment and offer one another a sign of peace. Would you please now?
You do look, my son, in a moved sort, as if you were dismayed. Be cheerful, sir. Be cheerful. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on. And our little life is surrounded with a sleep. Sir, I am vexed. Bear with my weakness. My brain is troubled. Be not disturbed with my infirmity. If you be pleased, retire into my cell and there repose. A turn or two I'll walk, and to still my beating mind. Now does my project gather to a head. My charms crack not, my spirits obey, and time goes upright with his carriage. How's the day?
Yay, Jacob. While you're seated, I want to ask you to sing another song with us. Like this. It's in every one of us to be wise. Find your heart, open up both your eyes. We can all know everything without knowing why. It's in every one of us by and by. That was so good. We need to do it again. It's in every one of us to be wise.
This is our Kairos time, the time where we focus on the present, the time that is between all that has happened and all that will be. This is a time that I personally sometimes have trouble with because I'm always going forward. I'm constantly moving ahead. And so this is a time for us to just be still, to be present with one another, to be present with the Spirit. And so I invite you to close your eyes and to think for just a minute about what it is like to just be here. So let's close our eyes together, be still, and try to calm ourselves from moving too far ahead and from thinking about what has happened in the past, and to just be. We give thanks for what is now, for all that it is and all that it can be. We are here, surrounded by grace, being offered a word of peace, and in the silence and in the music and all that is sad, but all that is hopeful. We breathe together, being reminded that this moment, this time, this space, this place, this community is a gift. And so we hold to the here and now, knowing that it is a gift to be grateful for. Amen.
Ecclesiastes 9. Life leads to death. That's it. Still, anyone selected out for life has hope, for as they say, a living dog is better than a dead lion. So seize life, eat bread with gusto, drink wine with a robust heart. God takes pleasure in your pleasure. Dress festively every morning, relish life with those you love. Each day is God's gift. All the same, I still say that wisdom is better than muscle. Even though the wise poor man is often treated with contempt and soon forgotten, the quiet words of the wise are more effective than the ranting of a king of fools. Wisdom is better than warheads, but one hothead can ruin the good earth. Philippians 2, 1-4. If you've gotten anything at all out of following Christ, if his love has made any difference in your life, if being in a community of spirit means anything to you, if you have a heart, if you care, then do me a favor, work with each other, love each other, be deeply connected. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourselves long enough to lend a helping hand.
Monday morning roasting Time is somber now. What surprise? By some time, baby, live my life. I wanna have a wife. I wanna have some kids. Look in their eyes and know they stand a chance. Give me help, give me strength, give a soul and not a feel sleep. Give me love, give me peace. Don't you know these days you bring everything? Got high hopes. I got high hopes. Got high hopes. I got high hopes. Got high hopes. I got high hopes. Got high hopes. I got high hopes.
Nice, very nice. It's so fun also to have Avery in here, where she gets to come in here and join us every now and then from the choir. She comes over from the chancel choir and joins us, and it's always fun when I come in here early in the morning and I watch the band rehearse. Avery's up there. She's just dancing. She's just like dancing, and I'm thinking, you don't really do that over there in the sanctuary at the chancel choir. Not that you couldn't. You could. You might stand out, but you could do that. But it's so nice to have you over here. I can see how much fun it is. And, of course, the band knows how much fun it is. And then you guys know how much fun it is. So, High Hopes. This is what a great song to sort of introduce this thing. Nasrud and Hoja. I tell a lot of Nasrud and Hoja stories. Steven Pinker, in his book, The Stuff of Thought, a book that came out about 4 years ago, he tells this story about Nasrud and Hoja, who is the Middle Eastern Sufist wise fool, right? The wisdom that is in his foolishness always starts to surface up. He tells the story of how the king had found Nasrudin finally, and Nasrudin, who was always stumping the king, always sort of outsmarting him in his foolish ways, never really being able to be entrapped by whatever the king was coming up with. Finally, the king, caught Nasrudin doing something and decided, all right, he's going to jail, but then he brought him before the magistrate and some of the others and said, we're going to sentence him to death. And then he looked at Nasrudin and said, give me one reason why I shouldn't hang you. And Nasrudin smiled and said, simple, I can make your horse fly. The king said, what? He says, I can make your horse fly. My grandfather was a great horse flying instructor. He taught horses how to fly, and some of the best horses that you've ever seen fly around. The king said, I've never seen a flying horse. Nasrudin said, well, they're rare, but I can teach your horse how to fly. If you'll give me a year, I can teach him how to fly. Now, everyone around the king thought this was absolutely hilarious. They thought it was hysterical, but it was such a clever idea and such a novel idea. He said, fine, Nasrudin, I'm going to put you in a sort of house arrest. You can work with my horse for a year. You teach it to fly. That'd be awesome. He says, however, if you don't, we're going to all come up with something really clever to do with you. Now, on his way to the house arrest, one of Nasrudin's friends was walking with him and said, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? And Nasrudin said, well, I was thinking maybe I could teach the horse to fly. No. I mean, you've got just 1 year. You know you can't do that. But Nasrudin said a lot of things can happen in a year's time. He said, for all we know, the king may die. Okay, that's fine, but what if the king doesn't die? He says, well, that's no problem. Maybe I'll die between now and the end of a year. And he said, but Nasrudin, you're just sort of taking chances. What if you don't die? What if the king doesn't die? He said, well, maybe the country will get into war, and that will turn everything upside down. And everything that he came up with, his friend was saying, yeah, but this is just throwing everything to chance, throwing it to the wind. What if none of that happens? Then Nasrudin said, a year's a long time. Who knows? Maybe the horse will fly. So we're talking about this idea of exuberance, living a life of exuberance. And I've been talking all this time about these we've been looking at Ecclesiastes as a way of experiencing it. And I've kind of decided that today is going to be sort of the final conclusion to this whole series. And so I've entitled it, Life is Hopeless, but not serious. It's not serious. And so what I want to think with you about is this whole idea of how we have hope, how we find hope. What does hope even mean? And what does it mean to live in the midst of the existential realities that Ecclesiastes is raising up to us, right? This reality of the fact of our finitude and our mortality. And so I want to think with you a couple of things that I've done before, and I want to just put these words up here so that you'll have them to think about while they're up here. And I'm going to put this in parentheses. A writer that I know and someone that I've actually worked with at a couple of conferences over the years, a guy named Arthur Franks, is a journalist who went through cancer and had a terminal diagnosis of cancer, but went through the process of the whole medical process of dealing with the cancer. And because he was a journalist, he began to realize that people that come into hospitals have certain ways of orienting around their experience, the ways of telling the story. Now, you can find this is true for you in just your encounters daily with people. There are certain ways we tell our stories about what happens to us. And it's also true for how we tell the stories of our faith and how we think about God even. So he found out that the most typical one is restitution. And restitution means if it's broken, you fix it. Okay? It's as simple as that. When it's broken, you get it fixed. You restore it. Chaos is the narrative that typically happens when people come in and they look to have it fixed, but then it's not fixed. What's left? You enter into this sort of perpetual, habitual sort of pattern. Now, you see this a lot in dysfunctional realities, either in dysfunctional systems or dysfunctional families or your own sort of personal dysfunctional neurosis that you can never get out of the trap, right? And then it ends up finding you're following a path of addiction or you're following a path of self-destruction. You just end up in this chaos narrative. We know people like that whose stories just seem to consume you when you sit down and you start to talk. The stories just overwhelm you. And so sometimes we avoid people who are stuck in these chaos narratives. And then the last one that he suggests is he suggests that there is a way to see life that doesn't see it as a zero-sum outcome. So restitution is basically a zero-sum opportunity, right? There's only one answer. Now, in zero-sum game theory, there's winners, there's losers, there's no extra resources out there, there's a finite number of things. Yesterday in the, how many of you watched the Kentucky Derby? Really? Oh, just so many? Did anybody see the horsefly at the end? Anyway, so the Kentucky Derby, it's a fixed sum. There's going to be winners, there's going to be losers, there's going to be only so many that place. It's a fixed game, it's a fixed outcome. You have winners, you have losers, it's a zero-sum game. But chaos sort of loses perspective of the game altogether, and life no longer has any order whatsoever. Quest says something different. Quest seems to look at life, the way in which you look at life is that there are non-zero-sum opportunities, that life has many things that we don't know about, that life has so many possibilities. About the only thing that's certain so far that we have pretty much guaranteed, science has proven this, so is observation, pretty much 100% chance that we're mortal. And that we will, in fact, die in the end. Now, we try to hedge that in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes we even live our lives, much of our lives have sort of lived in a denial of that fact, right? And so we have Ecclesiastes writing this whole book based on this existential question of our mortality. And I promised you last time that we'd stop reading these depressing texts, but then I ended up coming up with one more. And so I appreciate that we had to do this morning, and Jana read this. How does it start?
Life leads to death.
Life leads to death. That's it. You didn't get up and leave, so that's good. But here's the thing. What he does is what psychoanalysis does. It doesn't simply ask the question. Ecclesiastes says, look it right in the eye. But what I want to suggest to you that Ecclesiastes gets wrong is that sometimes when we ask the question, we presume that something's broken and that maybe nothing's broken at all. So that when things sometimes seem hopeless, it's because we've forgotten to realize nothing's really broken in the first place. And that's the conclusion that Ecclesiastes, I think, comes to at the end. It was interesting when Jakey, did you all recognize what Jakey was reading, what Jakey was reciting? From The Tempest? Yes, Shakespeare, Prospero's final speech. And I love that idea, right? At the very end of the whole thing, you've gone through this whole dramatic play, and it's Shakespeare's way of showing the drama of life, these ups, these downs, the sort of winners and losers. And then at the whole end, Prospero comes out, the very character in the play, and says, okay, these are just the dreams. This is just the stuff life's made of. Don't take it so seriously. Don't worry. You're just fine. Everything's going to be okay. And then his last line there, so how goes it with you, is again this existential question. Does it need fixing? Is it chaos? Or is there something that faith invites us into that says it's not broken in the first place? So how do we proceed? A friend of mine, a guy named Kevin Kling, tells this wonderful story. He's a fisherman. He lives up in Minnesota and a storyteller. He tells this story. He says once he was sitting at TV on Saturday morning. I don't know how many of you used to watch these fishing shows. Anybody? Yeah? No? Yeah, occasionally. Sometimes it would, in the old days, it might be someone like Jimmy Stewart might be on there with a guy on a boat, and they'd be out catching sunfish, and making a big deal out of it. But in more recent times, now they have like experts, and they're all taught in tan, and they're all athletes, and they're wrestling with a sailfish or something, or swordfish. And it's always some miracle lure, right? It's always some magical fishing technique that they're promoting. And so you could stare there for an hour and just see this amazing sort of drama unfold that's just centered around fishing. And he says once he was sitting there watching something when a guy come on, usually they'll have an announcer come on who will advertise the latest rod or reel, but this guy came on with something called the Wonder Lure. And he was wearing a bow tie and a striped a jacket. I mean, he looked like the classic salesman who ought to be selling you a used car, but there he was in this fishing setting selling something he called the Wonder Lure. And Kevin said that as he was watching it, it just started to amaze him because the guy said, this lure, what makes this lure so special is guaranteed to startle fish, to confuse fish, to agitate them to such a place that they will bite a plastic object and hook themselves. He said, you will definitely catch fish with the Wonder Lure. And then, to prove the point, he begins to read testimonials. He says, because what can happen when you start catching fish? You start feeling better about yourself. You begin to gain a sense of confidence, and you just carry yourself more proudly. So he said one person came on and actually told the story of how his life had been just subdued in work, just working to the bone, constantly stressed out, all long hours of day, never back home, working night and day, until one afternoon he took a break to go fishing, and he'd bought the Wonder Lure. He said, when I came home, the woman said that when my husband came home, the first thing he did was he showed me a stringer of fine catches. And then the next thing he did was he hugged me and kissed me. And I looked up at him and said, where's my husband? And then he started spending time with the kids. His job turned around. Now he's one of the managers at the office. And then another testimonial came on and talked about how another person found courage and strength and a sense of self-confidence, one after the other, of how this Wonder Lure had changed this person's lifestyle just by virtue of them catching fish and having more confidence. Then the guy starts to get a little teary-eyed. Kevin says he gets a little teary-eyed, and he pulls out a piece of paper, and he says, this one came in the mail just last week, and it just takes a moment for me to gather myself before I can read it. And then he reads this testimonial. A woman has written him to tell him about her husband, who had been diagnosed with cancer, and it was a bad prognosis. There was no real longevity. There was no real long-term prognosis here. She said he only had a matter of weeks or so. But the one thing my husband always wanted to do was to have that one fishing trip. And by now the announcer is starting to cry, and Kevin Kling says he's starting to cry. And he says, he reads it and she says, my husband went out with a friend and caught a stringer of fish, more fish than he had ever caught at any one trip. He came home feeling so wonderful. His face lit up. And she said he lived for an extra 3 or 4 weeks beyond what the so-called experts had said that he would. She said, my husband got to live the life finally that he'd always wanted to live and went out with a smile, having caught the fish. And the announcer was crying, and Kevin Kling was crying, and then he shouted out to his girlfriend in the next room, and he said, Mary, I think maybe one of these wonder lures could help us. Maybe we should get one just in case. And then Mary shouted back from the other room, fine, get 2, because I'm going to save the rainforest. Right, so what is it about certain things? I mean, we realize that advertising is centered around this. Advertising is centered around restitution. Much of our orientation to faith, depending on where you grew up, what church you went to, is also centered around restitution. You're broken. You're broken. God doesn't love you. God wants to love you, but you're broken. You need this solution. You need Christ to save you from your brokenness, when in reality, what we really need is to recognize what Christ already taught us in his own lifestyle, that we're not broken. We're what Rumi says. We simply haven't figured out how to get things out of the way so that we can experience the love that's already there. How to get things out of the way so that we can experience the presence of God in our lives that's already there. But how do you do that? So we have Ecclesiastes who continues to ask this question and labor with what in reality may simply be, we're not broken. We're not in fact broken. Do you remember that I've told this story in here once before? And I think, Peter, you've said that you really like this story a lot. I heard it when I was in Northern Ireland when we were on this trip that we took to Ireland. I heard it from our Bat Burns had told me. And he said, Seamus, Irishman, that's very typical, kind of like Nasrudin. Seamus was deserted on an island. And when people finally found him on the island, they found Seamus there by himself, but there were 3 small structures. Some of you might remember this. So when they found him, they got there to save him and rescue him. They asked him, they said, so you've been out here for almost 10 years. How'd you manage? And he said, well, I have these 3 structures I created. And they said, well, fine. They said, that's really great. What is this one? And he said, well, this is where I live. This is where I live. I created some shelters to protect myself. And they said, that's great. And they said, what is this other one? He says, well, I have a deep sense of faith. I didn't lose that by myself here, so that's my church. I built this little small church where I can go and I can pray and I can worship. And they said, well, what's this other one? And he said, oh, that's the other church. You don't want to go there. That place is bad. Those people aren't friendly at all. There's this sense in denial that we find ourselves in, that we sort of trap ourselves in. We trap ourselves in this kind of denial that this idea that we're broken, or that life's broken around us. And so we project it on others. You remember the story about the kid whose turtle flipped over and thought it was dead, and then eventually when the parents come in and they promise a party, they promise a funeral service with celebration and everybody invited, and then when the turtle jumps back over, he looks up at his dad and says, kill it. We live with this kind of denial of our reality that keeps us from facing the truth that maybe things aren't broken. That maybe the real challenge is simply that we haven't figured out how to get out of the way, how to find what Rumi says, how to peel back the layers so that we're not looking for love, we're simply letting go of the things that are preventing us from experiencing the love that's already there. How many ways do we prevent experiencing the love that's already present around us? How many opportunities do we have to create a sacred moment? But because of our narratives, because of the stories we tell ourselves, we can't do that. And so we have Ecclesiastes who's basically asking this same question, but he's asking the wrong question. And he realizes it towards the end. Towards the end, he realizes the question he's asking is the wrong question. There is no answer. It's not a zero-sum game, life or death. There's no answer for that question. It's the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is, how am I participating in life now? How am I participating in bringing about life? So we read the text that Jana read, enjoy the moment, seize life. It's not a selfish statement. Remember I told you if you look up the word enjoy, the word actually means to bring about life. To create life. We're invited to bring life to life. How many ways can we do that, and how many opportunities do we have? One of the things that Pinker says about this story that I think is interesting, he says this story about Nasrudin saying that he could bring a horse back to life simply illustrates one fun and important little idea, and that is it's a skillful relationship to hope. It banks on impermanence. Isn't that an interesting phrase? It banks on impermanence and doesn't jump to the conclusion of despair. Ecclesiastes has to wrestle his way all the way through all of these ideas. He keeps coming back to realizing we're going to die. This is terrible. This is going to be... And then some people get good stuff and they're bad people, and then some good people get bad experiences, but they're good people. And he wrestles with these questions, but all these questions are based on this idea that something has to be fixed. When he finally ends up with the conclusion, what's missing is the willingness to simply participate in the mystery. The willingness to shed some of the anxieties, to be present to the love that's already there. So I want to end with a couple of quick thoughts as the band comes on up. Most of us can easily find ourselves in this place right here, where we wish things were different, where we wish we could win the lottery and that would fix everything, where we wish we might have the perfect partner, or that our kids might be the perfect kids. We do a lot to try to protect that. We do a lot to try to guarantee that a certain lifestyle happens for our families or happens for us. But when we do that, we find ourselves caught in this zero-sum game, either-or kind of reality. When what Ecclesiastes is reminding us, and what Paul says to the church at Philippi, because they too, like our church today, were caught up in this either-or scenario. This is the right way, this is the wrong way. With regard to human sexuality, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. With regard to what faith means, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. With regard to the rituals we practice, or the music we sing, or the way we talk about God, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. Paul was dealing with that at the church at Philippi as well. And so he says, maybe the thing to do, if you really care about each other, if you really have a heart, if you really have been following Jesus, maybe the thing to do is to get out of the way, to get yourself out of the way, and to connect with others. How many ways can we connect with others? When we begin to do that, we break this narrative. It's no longer about how things are supposed to be. And it's this. It's more about how I am Christ to you. And if I'm listening, if I listen close enough, I'm going to find your Christ to me. But you have to be willing to listen. Secondly, it's about responding to the calls for love in our midst. What can we do now that makes a difference in someone else's life? How can we participate? It's not about my ego. It's not about me, because, as Paul says, that's the first thing we got to get out of the way. But that second step is, once I get out of the way, how can I pay attention enough to you to realize you really are Christ to me? Even if I completely disagree with you. Yesterday I was in Amarillo. It's the second reddest county in the state. Fort Worth is the first, in case you didn't know that. We're driving along because they're taking me to this little storytelling performance, and I'm talking to my hostess, and all of a sudden I realize she and I completely disagree about 4 different things that just came up. And my first inclination was to try to correct her. Then my second inclination was to try to ignore her, because I knew we would disagree. But then my third inclination was to see if I couldn't hear something I was missing. And that's the hardest thing. That's back here to this idea, to that faith is a quest. There are no black and white answers. There's insight. And insight only comes when we're willing to see one another as wise people on each other's journeys, not always as obstacles, but as people there for God to speak through in our lives. That when we do that, we begin to experience not just that life has more possibilities than we thought, But suddenly we begin to believe in even the possibility that a horse might fly.
It might seem strange to you, my friend. Some things are always heaven sent, and the more you want, the harder it gets, and the more you let go, the more you get. It's a crazy, beautiful life. It's a crazy, beautiful life, and some things make sense and you don't know why. It's a crazy, beautiful life. And nothing lasts forever. Someone told me so. Life is always changing. It ain't what you think you know. Even if you're standing still, you're floating in space. So grab a hold of your heart and you'll find your place. It's a crazy, beautiful life. It's a crazy, beautiful life. And some things make sense and you don't know why. It's a crazy, beautiful life. There you are, whatever you do, whatever wishes might come through, whatever you got, whatever you get, you make it a beautiful life to live. It's a crazy, beautiful life. It's a crazy, beautiful life. Some things make sense and you don't know why. It's a crazy, beautiful life.
Oh, I'm going to invite you to stay seated for just one quick minute, and then we'll get up for a blessing. I've been trying to figure out this whole time how I was going to say this, and I suppose that I kept thinking, well, I'll find a place in the middle of my message, and then I was thinking, there's just not a good place to say this, except at the very end. So for years, some of you remember Charles Gaby, who started this service, and then I was working with him from the beginning, 13, 14 years ago. And one of the things that we always kept toying around with was, we're a very unusual kind of community and an unusual kind of service. And it's one of the beautiful things about this church is this diversity of worship that's available in this one overarching congregation. It's one of the things that also rose to the surface in our Focus First survey and envisioning procedure, the process that we did over the last year, and then met this last February to sort of highlight what are our values, our core values as a church, and then what are our core initiatives for the future. And one of our core values, of course, right at the top was that we have these diversity of worship services that are available. And there are many different ways in which people can come into the church, can come back to faith, can come back to experiencing the community of God. And of course, this one being a very open-minded and inclusive one, and also one that sort of is oriented around questions and rather than, as we've said, more of a dialectic process rather than a didactic process where I just tell you what you need to believe and then you all agree. Or that we're all like-minded, because if you go around and ask each other, we're going to find out that there are a lot of people in here that don't think like I do or like you do, which is beautiful. It's amazing. And we're still sitting here together. So that's what's unique about this in some ways. And then, of course, our music and everything contributes to this. Charles and I always kept thinking, like, do you think we belong in this building? Do you think we should be here? And so for years, we always kept thinking that we'll go somewhere, we'll find a space. And it really never seemed like the right thing to do because the right space was never there. It was always too far away, or it was always too much of an undertaking to try to do something. But we have services now that are growing in this congregation that are using this room, and it's creating some sort of elbow bumping and stuff that happens in between services. And then this service is the gathering service is going to continue to grow at the 11 o'clock hour. But we had a great opportunity come up in this process, one which I was kind of looking for all along, but which came up unsuspected to me, and has turned out to be. Well, I always say, we always say a godsend, but then I always say, no, they're all God moments. You just got to open up your eyes and you'll see them. They're always there. And sure enough, this has always been here. We just never realized it. But we have an opportunity to have our worship happen 75 feet away from here, maybe 100, at the Center for Transforming Lives, which is, for some of you what used to be the old YWCA. Some of you know that the ballroom on the second floor there is a beautiful space. It's about this size, but not quite as high a ceiling, about half as high a ceiling, but a space, and it's a beautiful space. And that space became available for Sunday mornings. And so we've been in meetings with the leadership over there and had a final meeting this last week and sat down with the leadership. And what was funny was that I came in with a list of finally 12 sort of things we really need to make sure are going to be okay, that we can deal with these things. There were at least 6 weddings that had already been planned on those Sundays for the afternoon, which meant we might not be able to be there on those Sundays during the fall, which was that's a no-brainer. We can't do that. So there were lots of little obstacles. And what was fun was as we sat down, they were so excited about having us there that they took care of all of these issues and then some, and created space for storage for us, for our band, because we're going to have new equipment over there. Created opportunities for Wi-Fi and such for us to live stream from that space. So on June 10th, this service will now be happening at the Center for Transforming Lives, or the old YWCA. Now, there's a lot of things that might come to mind that are questions, and I'm going to be talking about this over the next few weeks, but because the staff knows about it and was announced this last week, and several folks have already kind of been privy to this thing, I decided we'll try to shortcut any kind of gossip that gets out of there, because here's the first thing I don't want you to hear, and that is this idea that we got kicked out, right? Because, truly, some of us have this narrative that we're weird enough we should be kicked out. Some of us have been carrying that around for a long, long time, but that's really not what's going on here. In fact, here's how I can tell you that. Number one, the Board of Trustees, I offered a budget that we would need to have in order to make this work for the next 3 years, during which time, because of our church growing and all these different services, during which time the church will undergo a capital campaign and is going to build a new facility that will house a bunch of different worship services as well. So we'll be back eventually in about 3 years. But so supportive of that the Board of Trustees not only granted the budget I'd requested, but added a third to it. They weren't saying we're kicking you out. They're saying we want this service to continue. It continues to be at the top priority of our church, to have these distinctive kinds of worship services. But here's the other cool thing. What the Y does for women in our community is profound. The service that they provide to women in impoverished settings or in domestic violence situations, in transitional situations, they help 4,000 plus women and families every year. And what we are doing in a very tangible way by moving our service there is we're now actually contributing a significant amount of income towards that outreach that they're doing as well. So we are literally participating in that same ministry, if you will, in that same outreach and service to the community. So it's going to be a beautiful thing in so many different ways. And there's a lot of stuff that you might have questions about and such. So we're going to address that over the next coming weeks or so. But June 10th will be our first Sunday over there. And I just want you to make sure you put that on your calendars. If you have any questions, you can email me, you can talk to me, you can ask me, you can talk to Sharm. Nothing's going to change so much as simply we'll just be moving 105 feet away. And the other cool thing is that we now have parking right next to the building. So you can actually park right next to the place instead of having to walk across parking lots at 1111. So anyway, I think about how many ways we can make a difference in the community, and we do by coming to worship here. We will even more so be making a huge difference by coming to worship there. It's just a cool thing, so I'm really excited about this. So let's stand for our blessing and take somebody's hand beside you. Receive this blessing. The task is ended, and so go in pieces. Our concluding faith and opinion are rear-ended, and certainty is being amended. Something is getting mended that we didn't know was torn. Sometimes unraveling, but we are traveling to a place of new-formed patterns with unknowing and delusion as the fusion of loss and hope and pain and beauty. So the task is ended. Go in pieces to see and to feel the world anew. Amen.